mark the argument or the thesis, what's another thing you might do when you annotate?
The strategies. So, he was actually mentioning it before, using ethos, logos, pathos.
Okay.
So in here actually, the kind of like language that he was using is kind of like uniform language. So that gives you an idea of who this is intended for, like what kind of audience. And it kind of like makes you think, okay, this guy actually kind of knows what he's talking about, so it's somewhat a reliable piece.
Okay, so you're looking, go ahead.
Yeah, kind of technical. So you definitely want to look where other, like going to where it's being biased or not. And so all of this will like help you with questions that might have to be asked.
Yeah, okay, so you might want to write down the things you learn about the author's credibility or bias as you go. Even more generally also, I don't think we said this, but questions.
Yes.
Asking questions. Did you run across anything, any vocabulary in here that was unfamiliar?
Actually, it all seemed fairly common. It didn't seem like any kind of really high-level things around.
Like, what about this word pre-formulation?
It's kind of like before formulation from like form or create. So that's like
Okay, that's the one that that's the word I picked that.
So, yeah, you kind of broke it down into pieces that you recognized in order to figure out what it meant. Let's say that you thought, I'm not positive about that word, then what would you do when you were annotating?
Use sentence rules, meaning word after or before.
Okay, so use context clues to figure it out?
if not, just highlight it and look for the definition later on.
Yeah, okay, so when you annotate, another thing to mark is vocabulary that's unfamiliar, right? What about opinions? You can't really have an opinion really yet because you haven't read the whole lesson. But that's a really important thing to be marking when you annotate, is your own response to the text.
Okay.
So, because what my students do at the end of each, we only read 4 pieces in my first semester class, but they're really challenging pieces. And at the end, the students write an essay in response, posing their own argument. So it's helpful when they're annotating to be responding. So is that any different from the way you read now? So that's something you already know how to do too.
Yeah, I was in a language composition and what you teach someone
That you would want to respond yourself to the text.
Yeah.
Okay, great. We talk about it in my classes, reading with and against the grain as well. So when you're reading with the grain, you're trying to understand things the way Percy sees them. And when you're reading against the grain, you're saying, okay, now I'm going to see what could I critique about this? What do I think maybe he's not doing so well? Or where do I disagree with his argument? So those are all great things to do when you annotate. Looking for things in the text maybe that you think he didn't do so well, because that's allowed. Maybe Dr. Percy didn't convince you the way he wanted to. So you might annotate the spot where you think what he's saying isn't so convincing.
Yeah.
Okay, so one of the primary things that that helps my students succeed at the college level is being good annotators. And it helps them succeed for a couple of reasons. One is that when they go back, they have notes to themselves and they can engage more directly with the text. Also, when you're annotating, how is that different from if I just said to you, read this? What happens when you annotate?
You can always go back. It'll be back up your pen. Yeah, you go back up your pen and show what you got with the text.
Okay, so you've got notes already to work with if you need to back up an argument. Yeah. What about in terms of the experience of reading the text when you annotate versus when you don't annotate?
It kind of forces forces you to actually analyze and actually think through what you're reading. Because sometimes you can just be reading and be just skimming through the lines, and that doesn't really help any, like, a lot.
Yeah.
So, at least not in terms of this kind of assignment.
Right, so it helps you really focus in
Yeah.
and pay attention and be a more analytical reader.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so that's one of my #1 pieces of advice about college writing is to annotate. Even if the professor doesn't explicitly say you should annotate, if you're expected to have a close reading of a text or expected to be able to respond to it, just take it upon yourself to do it, whether it's assigned that way or not. And then I'll talk later about some of the things that hold my students back. One of them is not rereading text, reading it only once. So I always tell them when they go back and read the second time to use a different color pen or a pencil so you can actually trace what happened in the second pass through the piece or the third pass through, because you'll notice different things every time you annotate. And then you have kind of a record of the evolution of your thinking about it too, which can be kind of interesting. I should have brought my textbook to show you. My textbook is full of annotations in all different colors, because I've taught the piece a lot of times, so every time I go through it, I notice something different. Okay, so then the second thing I wanted to talk about is revising versus editing, and we talk about those things as two different things. So, when you're editing a paper, and not everybody's going to use these terms the same way I'm using them, but the point is to understand that there are two different things that you do. So when you're editing a paper, that's when you go through and you check your commas and your typos and your grammar and make sure everything is the way it should be. When you're revising, think about the word revision. You're revisioning or reseeding your paper. So in my class, we go through 3 drafts of every paper that the students read, and it's part of it's planned out in the syllabus that way, but in most classes in college, the paper will be assigned and you'll just be expected to do it. So one of the things you want to do is leave enough time to revise so that you're not handing in what's essentially a first draft of a paper, but you're actually allowing the time for the revision to happen. So we talk in my class about the difference between editing, which is fixing the grammar and mechanics, and revising, which is rethinking the ideas. And so I brought you a sample of one of my students doing this, so you can kind of see. And again, you guys sound like this is a experience, so maybe you've already done this. This is the student's second draft. So this paper is actually her final paper of the semester, and I didn't bring the whole paper, it's just the first few pages. This is her 4th draft, so this is the final draft that she handed in. So take a look and see if you can notice some of the stuff that she revised, not just fixed the grammar, but that she actually revised between one copy and the other. So it's the same paper, but it's the 2nd draft and the 4th draft. Yeah. And the question, I should tell you, the question she's responding to asks the students to evaluate the work they've done in the course. So she's going back over all the things she read and all the things she wrote and kind of evaluating how the course worked. So tell me when you see. Actually, I'll give you a few minutes. Read the whole thing through, and you can actually mark this up if you want to.